Gregtech New Horizons is a mod pack that sets out to take a simple block game like Minecraft and transform it into a thousands of hours long quest to go from picking up dirt all the way to harnessing the energy of a solar system. I'm not kidding, one of the in-game items called the Eye of Harmony is said to, quoting the wiki, harness the power and resources of small solar systems by creating a pocket of space-time through trans-dimensional engineering. What? With item descriptions like that, surely there was no chance I could stay away from GTNH. However, I thought it'd be smart to start with a smaller goal than conquering stars, so instead I wanted to know how hard is it to make diamond armor. To start, I loaded up the mod pack. It is, in fact, still Minecraft, which means there were some trees that needed punching. The first night was bound to be brutal, but thankfully I did stumble upon a village to shack up in. Simple tasks like making tools now require much more work. My first set of tools can be made by collecting gravel and crafting 3 blocks into pieces of flint, but it became clear on the first night that getting armor was in fact a good goal to have. There are unique mob types spawning all over the world, and it's also pitch dark outside without any torches. Unable to skip the night, I did some mining for cobblestone in some random villager's basement. They will either not mine or they will die. I was actually quite productive the next day, making a bed and stealing a door from another villager. Yes, even doors are hard to make in GTNH. Everything was actually looking pretty good up until I carelessly decided to read the quest book outdoors when this happened. For free if I just... Oh. Well, gentlemen, I think I'm f***ing dead. What the f*** is this? Okay, wow. So that's one of the fun different mob types I was talking about. A close call for sure. I wasn't aware of it yet, but that cobblestone blob had some more secrets up its sleeve. This is also a good time to mention possibly the most difficult part about getting started with GTNH, food. If you just keep eating the same food over and over like in regular Minecraft, it restores less and less hunger until it becomes pretty much useless. So you have to discover different food types and make unique recipes that you rotate through. Thankfully, there's a mod that introduces hundreds of new foods. It's very cool, but in the early game it means going hungry is to be expected. So after a few days of exploring other villages and collecting resources, I had a small garden up and running. Usually wouldn't care about this so early on, but in this, you need to. I also managed to loot an iron sword and axe off some random enemies. My current flint tools were absolute trash that broke constantly, costing me a ton of flint to repair. By collecting paper and string, I was eventually able to set up a tool assembly line using Tinker's Construct. Now I could make unique tool parts and combine them together for something a little bit more reliable, but not by much because they were still made out of flint. However, it was a huge improvement. Now I had a better pickaxe and could more easily remove the cobblestone monstrosity outside my house. At which point I discovered, what the I just want to clear the stupid cobblestone. Yeah, most of the blocks were infested with buffed silverfish. I'll spare you all the details, but for the most part I killed something like 50 silverfish over the course of an hour or two. And keep in mind I can hardly heal while I take damage due to these food restrictions, I have a terrible sword, and practically no armor. Thank you, Drowning Creeper, very fun experience. Another thing I forgot to mention is that at the start of GTNH you have no way to get coal or charcoal. And no, smelting logs doesn't work. Instead you have to make big structures called coke ovens, which very, very slowly convert source blocks into fuel. Like logs to charcoal, for example. 2 hours of collecting sand, gravel, and clay later, I had one of these ovens ready to go. In that time, I had also managed to build out my house a bit more, while also growing the farm. A lot of the progress at this stage in the mod pack is happening at the same time. Basically, I'm multitasking things constantly, whether that be the garden, or the coke ovens, or whatever. And the multitasking was about to get a little bit easier since it was time for me to get some ore. Ore spawning is different in GTNH and it's a bit hard to explain, but basically instead of ore spawning randomly throughout the world, there are set locations every few chunks where a massive deposit of a random ore type will spawn. Thus, by following the quest book, I now had a bit of iron and was able to upgrade my tools. However, that iron came as a reward from the quest book. I was only in the Bronze Age by this point. I took a break from my mining to start up an animal farm. Leather, wool, and meat would all be invaluable in the coming quests. Therefore, starting to breed the animals early would be a good idea. By now, I had gotten into a pretty good routine of collecting resources and growing crops. I took some time to make a second coke oven and upgrade my house a bit. Around that time, I managed to find my first redstone vein, which would be very important later on. The timing actually worked out pretty well though, since I had also prepared around 40 bronze ingots by combining copper with tin. I was close to having bronze tool, but I wasn't able to use that metal quite yet, since I needed smeltery in order to work with molten metal. There did happen to be another village nearby that had a smeltery going unused though. I decided to take it off their hands. They wouldn't mind or they would die. After several more hours of crafting, I now had everything I needed to start making metal tools, except for one last ingredient, lava. Unsurprisingly, you can't hold lava like in normal Minecraft, but there are special gloves you can craft that let you carry around a single bucket without burning yourself. And so at last I was able to make actual tools. Total time played so far, around 15 hours. One thing that continues to be a problem for me even to this day is storage. So when I was finally able to create storage drawers that can hold large amounts of single items, I was very excited. Both those drawers and also the iron chest that I had now made were only possible due to the metalworking tools I had created beforehand. Things like the hammer, file, screwdriver, and the saw. Of course, none of these are in vanilla Minecraft, but they're a staple of GT&H, consistently being used throughout. These technological breakthroughs enabled me to mine ore more and more easily, since the various drops quickly filled storage to the brim. The endless need for storage incidentally inspired me to start work on a more permanent living situation. Thus, work began on the factory. It'd be a long time before I finished this building, but even the beginning of it was motivating to continue. Another thing I forgot to mention is that when you pick up a water source block, it no longer is replenished like in vanilla. You get the one source and that's it goes away. As you can imagine, that was a massive step forward whenever I finally finished the water tank. It slowly fills with water from the air over time, and then you can pour water directly from it with a bucket or whatever. So basically, no more running back and forth to a lake. I did a lot of running between lakes, trust me. Throughout this entire time in the Stone Age, I had been building up infrastructure while also collecting basic resources. Meat and plants for food, wool and leather for clothing, and basic mechanical devices for activities as simple as opening and closing a door. All of that was very important, but it paled in comparison to the advancement I made when finally crafting the small coal boiler. With this very first machine, I could burn all sorts of fossil fuels like coal and charcoal in order to convert them to steam, allowing me to power primitive machinery. I needed to be careful that it never ran out of water, or it would in fact explode. But other than for that very minor detail, it was my most valuable possession, created with a mix of bronze, bricks, and iron. Since I was now a highly cultured Steam Age connoisseur, I found it only fitting that I expand the factory floor a bit. I'll spare you the details, but trust me when I say just making the glass panes for the building was an entire journey in itself. The problem with my current steam generation is that once the steam was created, it could either be used immediately or it would be wasted. To address this, the best option was to spend several hundred iron ingots on a massive tank that could store the excess steam. While obviously very expensive, this tank would let me generate nearly endless steam without wasting any of it. So now, with my steam secured, I could begin making machines to actually utilize the steam. The first two were the alloy smelter, where I could combine two metals into a more powerful version, and the macerator, which would allow me to double the ore that I mined by breaking it down into its crushed form, which could then be smelted. With the foundations of the Steam Age now set up, the path forward was clear for a time. I would collect copper and tin to create bronze, and then use that bronze to create progressively more complex and costly machines. The next one on the list is actually one of the machines that would directly contribute to making my diamond armor one day. The compressor. This machine applies huge amounts of pressure to anything placed inside it, hence the name, condensing the contents down. It's very slow to operate, but is unavoidable in the long run. After spending an embarrassing amount of time messing around with bees, that all turned out to be useless, I got started on the next fundamental material I needed: steel. Ever heard of it? All machines beyond the Steam Age require it. The only problem, it takes forever to make, and can only be made inside of large structures called blast furnaces. So then let's get to blasting. That's what you might say if you didn't know what materials were required to make a blast furnace. You don't really need to know the specifics, but it's basically all this. Yeah. I'd say the most difficult ingredient to gather for this bad boy was the gypsum dust. It spawns only in an ore vein that I had yet to discover, so I had my work cut out for me. My search for gypsum took me far and wide, and at one point even led me to the depths of a dungeon. A very dark and scary dungeon that I quickly ran away from because, baby. Collecting these materials wasn't really something I could just up and decide to do out of nowhere. They were collected slowly, allowing me time to work on side projects. Like this dark room, for example. In it, I grew ore berries. It's literally growing ore, like iron, on trees. Very small trees that aren't really trees. It just has to be very dark. I still haven't really used this as much as I would probably hope to, but in the future I have no doubt that I will. Regardless, after some time, I was finally able to construct my first blast furnace. I've spent somewhere around 40 hours in the world at this point, I'd say. By the way, earlier when I said steel takes forever to make, the amount of time I was referring to was 10 steel ingots every 40 minutes in real life, as in like almost an hour. For 10. I didn't know it then, but getting diamond armor would require several hundred steel ingots, as in close to 1,000. So do the math, even just the steel, nothing else considered, was going to take a ton of real-life hours to collect. One other such factor was the need for superior mining tools, like the hammer, which I happily made as soon as I had my first steel. It's like a pickaxe, but it mines in a 3x3 area, so 9 times as efficient. Some people love women, some people love money, and some love fame. I love my hammer. I'm a hammer believer and a hammer purist. Nothing may come before my hammer and not be broken. The discovery of steel opened up many doors for advancement both in real life and also for me in GT&H. Most notably perhaps, an array of more advanced machines were now available. They all worked faster and more efficiently than their Steam counterparts. Well, they're still Steam, but now they have steel on them. It's a whole thing. As I began to stockpile my steel, I also began to feel the need for another storage upgrade. And so my storage solution, even to current day, was created. Essentially, it's a wall of storage drawers that hold an assortment of my most abundant resources. It's pretty similar to the old system, but now it's on the second floor of the factory and is much more diverse. As I was now producing a quaint amount of steel, I continued steadily upgrading everything that I could with my new, stronger metal. Perhaps most significantly, I created a backpack, which is not only infinitely stylish, but also offers me an additional 36 inventory slots at all times. On the potentially less beneficial end of things, I also made massive strides in the architectural field, devising incredible inventions such as the handrail to prevent me from falling the massive height of 8 blocks from my second floor. Safety first. Much like the endlessly cringed crypto commercial featuring Matt Damon talking about fortune favoring the bold, fortune also favors the brave. And I'm not talking about Dogecoin. No, the fears that I describe involve traveling the Nether. A terrible place as always, but now with 100 times as many giant spiders. I really would have been a-okay with no giant spiders. Unfortunately, the makers of this mod pack are in fact sadists. I digress, but long story shorter, I ran through the Nether as quickly as possible and as quietly as possible, collecting my little bag of goodies. Mostly glowstone and some other random trinkets, but regardless, it was enough to continue the quest book. The quest I'm referring to in particular is one that calls for sulfur ore. Making any machines beyond the simple steam ones that are currently supporting me would require the creation of rubber in quite large quantity. If you were wondering how to get rubber, well, you need sulfur. And in GT&H, sulfur only spawns in the Nether. So that was the main source of my brief trauma. As mentioned previously, the macerator doubles ore and is therefore invaluable. It is also, however, painfully slow. Thankfully, there is a very handy alternative option in the steam grinder. It functions practically the same as the macerator, but is more energy efficient and most beneficially can macerate 9 items at a time instead of 1. I'll let you work out the math on how much of an improvement that is. The only issue is that it's a multi-block structure, meaning it costs several hundred bronze ingots. For both of our sakes, I've cut out the part where I gather that, and you can instead sleep happily, believing that I just magically had all the ingredients that I needed. The only issue with the steam grinder was the fact that it is very hungry. Well, the only issue beyond its cost, but yeah. Also, it doesn't really want to eat any of my food. No, it just wants to eat steam. A lot of steam. A lot more steam than I had. So I scrambled to rig up this Frankenstein of an automation. Basically, it just ticks redstone every so often to get the coke ovens to pour out their creosote and coal coke. I would be needing a lot more of each in order to meet my new power demands. It took quite some time to actually get it all worked out, but once it was done, I had a very steady supply of fuel. With that addressed, I had some free time. My coke ovens were giving me coal coke, which I then fed to my blast furnaces. It was a beautiful system that just needed some time to run. I decided to spend that time as wisely as possible, in the kitchen. I mean, I didn't actually have a kitchen yet, so firstly I needed to make one. I started by tearing down some walls, and then I put up a few new ones. For whatever reason, kitchen floor tiles are actually quite expensive, but with a little bit of grinding and a little elbow grease, I was able to lay down a decent amount of it. After a little while training my architectural skill again with some shiny purple lamps, I got down to the brass tacks. That being the actual sink, refrigerator, and cabinets. By the end of the day, I had my kitchen made. This would practically put an end to my hunger problems as I now had access to a nearly endless supply of complex food recipes. In addition to the ease of access, every new food I tried for the first time would give me a small boost to my health, which is why my health bar is orange now and will continue changing colors moving forward. By now, it had become pretty apparent that my machines were still drawing way too much steam. They would frequently shut down mid-operation. To address this, I decided to try a different approach than continuing to build more of the same boilers that I had been relying on so far. Instead, I went with a different type of boiler from the Railcraft mod. This one is unique because it burns creosote oil instead of coal coke. I happened to have an excess of creosote oil, so it seemed to be the natural option. It also didn't hurt that this boiler could output substantially more than the coke boilers. The only obstacle left to solve was piping the new source of steam over to the existing steam tank. I had built this boiler on the other side of the factory, so it required a handful of fluid pipes. While not cheap, it wasn't insurmountable. With this new infrastructure, I felt confident I would be able to supply my demands for a long time. Now that my steam production had been increased, I had the means to match my grinder's 9x output rate with a similar structure. It's basically a really big furnace that works in quite a familiar way. It smelts 9 items at once instead of, 1. Of course, this is pretty convenient since now I could run things directly from my grinder and into the furnace. By this point, I was nearing the end of the steam age. I had been here for a long time by now, exploring, grinding, and of course crafting a lot. One One of the last things I did in this age was making a multi-block compressor that, by now, you can probably guess how it worked. It compresses 9 things at a time instead of 1. It's expensive, but I got it done. The first glimpse of what lied ahead of me in the low voltage, or LV, age was crafting my first electronic circuit. It was an incredibly difficult recipe that took me a very long time and resulted in a fair amount of cursing. But I guess that's what happens whenever you're dealing with technology that's so complex compared to setting coal on fire and hoping the resulting steam will crush rocks for you. My very first circuit was quickly followed up by my very first LV machine. There's no point in making machines that you can't power, so the first LV machine I created was actually a steam turbine. It's quite similar to my existing coal burners, but it outputs electric energy instead of just steam, allowing for far more advanced processes. I set it up at the end of my existing steam machine so I could easily pump it full of steam, and the natural progression from there was to begin the grueling process of crafting the necessary machine components to make all of the basic LV machines, of which there are a lot. Namely, the wire mill, which forms wire from ingots, the bending machine, which forms metal plates from ingots, and the lathe, which, you guessed it, forms metal rods from ingots. It definitely doesn't sound too exciting, but I assure you that the ease of access these machines grant is a vast improvement over handcrafting each of these individual components. I was finally nearing my goal after over 80 hours, or 2 full work weeks for the average American, oh my god, and the machine that I was really after was the cutting machine. As it turns out, diamonds are kind of tough, as in hard to mold, unless of course you can press them into a block and then run them through the cutting machine. But how is the cutting machine strong enough to cut diamonds? The answer is simple, and it's cobalt. Cobalt is a resource that is found only in the Nether, so I guess I'll just go take my pickaxe and mine some. That's what you might say if you're an idiot. You can't mine it. No, the only way for me to get it at this point is as a byproduct in a new machine called the centrifuge. If you've ever heard that song that roughly goes like, "You spin me right round, baby," congratulations, you already have a pretty solid understanding of how the centrifuge works. You put dust in it, it spins it around really fast, and gives you back out a few different types of dust, including cobalt. And so, with centrifuge built and cobalt in hand, I finally crafted the cutting machine. I wasted no time throwing my diamond blocks in so that the very long processing time could begin. The cutting gets so hot that it actually needs water pumped into the machine to keep it cooled down, which was a fun little side quest, I guess. But more importantly, finally, after 2 years and 101 days in-game and 90 real-life hours spent, I crafted my diamond armor. No longer would I be a little pipsqueak to be pushed around by my oppressor, namely gravel creepers, enchanted silverfish, and giant spiders. Now I would be the pusher, and it felt good. GTNH is not for the faint of heart, but I will say, playing through it so far has been an absolute joy as someone that gets a kick out of tech mods. It presents unique challenges and requires effort that few other packs do, but it's packaged in an incredibly tidy way. It informs you without holding your hand and provides a loose guideline on what to do next without being overbearing. I've been continuing my playthrough and regular uploads on this channel, so if you're interested in seeing that, I recommend clicking the playlist that I've just attached, and also subscribing to the channel if you want to. It's not really that big of a deal. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you press the like button down below and maybe even shared it with a friend if you're feeling very charitable. But yeah, either way, I recommend Gregtech New Horizons even through the struggle and really appreciate you watching. Bye-bye now. Meow.